Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Thiago, and I'm here to introduce our next speaker. She is a very special person. She is a role moderator. Fernanda is going to talk about gender bias in course books, and she's an undergraduate student majoring in English and Portuguese. She's currently working as a teacher assistant at Inglês Sem Fronteiras, UFRJ, and she holds a specialization degree in teaching English and use of new technologies. Also, she is currently researching on the grammatical aspect, and she is interested in the dynamics of language and gender. Right. So, without further ado, Fernanda.
E onde que eu clico pra... Hello. Hello, everyone. So my name is Fernanda. This is me. And I'll be presenting to you today my work at college that I've been researching on. This is gender bias in course books. Is that it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Thiago already presented me, so I'm going to skip that part. And so basically, this is the presentation outline. But first of all, I want to say that I'm very pleased to be a part of this event by sharing one of the themes that I'm working on at college. And so the outline today for my presentation is, I'll be talking about many different things. First of all, the banality of gender bias, and then some identified forms of gender bias that were identified in course books as well. And one question that is very important for us to ask is gender dichotomous? And also, I'll be talking about fundamental aspects, patterns, and persistence of gender bias in course books, or GBIC. And I'll be also talking about suggested strategies for fighting gender bias, strategies for the classroom, and also discussion time. So first of all, let's talk about banality of gender bias. So you want to?
Okay, so
is that okay?
No, it's not working. So.
Also leave it. Yeah. Is that okay?
Let me see.
So it's fine. Okay. So first of all, talking about gender bias, the banality of it. So according to Cameron, this is Deborah Cameron. This is she's a linguist, and she has a very good blog. I'll be showing you the link later for you to see. She says that gender bias, especially sexism, can go unnoticed in our daily routines and language use. So she says in her blog that when feminists draw attention to sexism, for example, they are accused of taking offense where none was intended or embracing the so-called victim culture. So she gives an example of banal sexism. The formulas used in news stories about the killing of women by men. I'm sure that you can see that on Brazilian newspapers as well. So there's a pattern in the language used to label perpetrators and victims. So she talks about one specific example from the English-speaking media. So in cases where innocent women were killed or assaulted by strangers, the perpetrators were given dehumanized labels like beast, maniac, monster, and by contrast, reports of domestic violence, including homicide, tended to label men in ways that both humanize them and emphasize their own status as victims. So this is also very common in Brazilian newspapers. I've looked for this type of news, and that's very common here as well. So when gender bias is embedded in language and daily routine, it opens room for sexism and its negative consequences. And want to say anything? Here. Oh, it's here. It's here. So here. So also quoting Eckert and McConnell-Ginet, they are the authors of a wonderful book called Language and Gender. The references, I'll be putting the references at the end of this presentation. So they say that the more gender stereotypes are reproduced, the more it is reinforced in society. This is precisely because gender seems natural to us, and beliefs about gender seem to be obvious truth, that we need to step back and examine gender from a new perspective, because this is so natural to us, right? And gender is not something that we are born with, and not something that we have, but something that we do and perform. So I think you remember how Judith Butler, no? Continue? So I don't know if you remember that Judith Butler, she came to Brazil for a presentation, and she's totally hated here because of this affirmation that gender is performative. And so we need to talk about this. And one thing that we can give as an example is that gender bias is constructed since birth. For example, you can go to a store here in Brazil to buy a present for a newborn baby, and this is the question that salespeople will immediately ask you: is that a boy or a girl? If you say I don't know or I don't care, because that can happen, imagine their reaction, imagine their faces, because basically this is very commonplace for us, right? To talk about the kids, if they are boys or girls, so we get specific presents for them, specific colors for them, So continuing, I was looking at Sadker and Sadker's blog about many gender bias in course books and also in the curricula. So I selected some of them, some of gender bias that were identified by them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one that I selected. This is from 1980. So I think you can check later if this is still true nowadays. I believe it is. So let's see each one. First of all, they talk about invisibility. What you don't see makes a lasting impression. So they say that the most fundamental and oldest form of bias in instructional materials is the complete or relative exclusion of a group. Women, those with disabilities, gays, homosexuals continue to be missing from many of today's texts. So this was in 1980. You can imagine that we didn't have a lot of progress on this area. And also stereotyping shortcuts to bigotry. So they say that perhaps the most familiar form of bias is the stereotype, which assigns a rigid set of characteristics to all members of a group at the cost of individual attributes and differences. So there's an example that they mention. Men are portrayed as assertive and successful in their jobs, but rarely discussed as husbands or fathers. And women are usually presented as caregivers, as people that are mothers, that have this natural motherly feeling, you know, that happens. And imbalance and selectivity, a tale half told. So the authors say that curriculum may perpetuate bias by presenting only one interpretation of an issue, situation, or group of people. So such accounts simplify and distort complex issues by omitting different perspectives. So one example, maybe a text at a course book, maybe, you know, a history book, show that women were given the vote, but they don't discuss the work, the sacrifices, and even physical abuse suffered by the leaders of the suffrage movement in different places, that they conquered the vote. You know, they were not given the vote, they were conquered. They conquered the vote. And also linguistic bias, that words count. So if you see in my slide, I put the wrong title in there, but it's okay. Let's talk about linguistic bias. Language can be a powerful conveyor of bias in both blatant and subtle forms. And linguistic bias can impact race, ethnicity, gender, accents, age, disability, sexual orientation. And one example that the authors give is that such words as founding fathers, mankind, businessmen serve to deny the contributions and even the existence of females. They're all related to men. You know, man is seen as people. And this is very common in language course books. And also, a question that I want to ask you is, you know, just a moment. So this is the question that I want to show you, that I was thinking when I was preparing this presentation. Is gender dichotomous? This is a picture that I found on the internet. This is taken from a website that made an article about the toxic culture behind gender stereotypes. So if you see this picture, we have a man represented in blue and a woman represented in pink. And they have speech bubbles. They have like the representation of tastes and things that they do, things that they like doing. And you see that they are they are separated by color. So the blue ones are related to men and the pink ones are related to girl. And if you see in these pictures, in this picture, we see many things that are related to women that are common stereotypes for women. And what is in blue, we see common stereotypes for men. For example, we have a joystick in there. This is for men, like women don't play video games. You know, we have many different examples in there. And also, this is something worth questioning because this is considered something natural, you know, the duality of female versus male. And if you see that in this picture, there is nothing related to people that don't conform to their assigned gender. People that are gender fluid, you know, non-binary, we don't have anything related to these people here in this picture. So if you think about it, gender goes beyond the dichotomy female versus male. When we think about it, we see that other kinds of gender are usually invisible in our society, invisible in course books, invisible in many different areas. The invisibility of other kinds of gender is everywhere. We can find more information on the internet, but if we think about the course books specifically, they are not represented in these places. And also, so we come back there. So thinking about the fundamental aspects of gender bias in course books, the most important thing is that we need to talk about it. You know, this is a very important topic to discuss, right? Because according to Blumberg, course books occupy the most part of the classes and are also used in teacher training, reinforcing gender stereotyped attitudes. So if we think about our classroom and we think about the teacher training process, I don't know about you, but about my perspective, you know, from my perspective, from my experience with, you know, undertaking the teacher training, people never talk to me about gender bias. We never had a lesson about gender bias, how to perceive gender bias, how to fight against it. Talking about teacher training courses, you know, we didn't have this kind of theme in there. And so it may be difficult for teachers to talk about it in the classroom, talk about it with students when teachers themselves are blind to gender bias. So this is a concern that we should have. Also, gender bias course books have been found worldwide according to Blumberg's research. So it has a big influence in classrooms all over the planet, you know. Also, gender bias in course books is suspected of diminishing girls' achievement because if we think about gender stereotypes related to boys and girls at school, boys are usually perceived as good in math because they have a logical mind, you know, and girls don't have that logical mind. If we think about the stereotypes, they are better in languages, for example, in literature, and of course that this produce consequences in which girls are not. The idea of studying math is not reinforced for girls, but it's more reinforced for boys. And we also don't tell our girls to pursue different careers, such as, you know, maybe girls as scientists or engineers, you know. We tend to see that also in the media, that boys want to be scientists or, I don't know, firemen or this kind of professions that are seen as mainly, you know, that are seen as only for men. Of course, that we have exceptions nowadays. Of course, that we have women as firefighters and women as scientists, but the number of women in those professions are, you know, it's not that big if you think about it. And also that if we think about these stereotypes, maybe boys want to be teachers, maybe boys want to be in professions that usually are seen as womanly, you know. So we have to see both sides of this. And in this article, Bloomberg cites that only in Sweden there were true government efforts to eliminate gender bias from course books and curricula. And these efforts have been going on for over 40 years. So this is like a big effort from Sweden. And she says that only Sweden, so we have a country that is fighting gender bias in course books and curricula. This is happening in other countries as well. But this is not like with a big effort. We are not seeing many differences nowadays, you know. And I don't know how to do that. I'm so sorry. Okay, so thinking about the uniform patterns of gender bias in course books, according to this research by Bloomberg, she says that females were, underrepresented. So if you think about the proportion of named characters, mentions in titles, citations in indexes, females were underrepresented in all of those aspects. And females and males were shown in highly gender stereotyped ways. So if we think about language course books that we use here in Brazil, we see women as housekeepers, we see women as secretaries. So we have these occupational division of labor that is, asymmetric. Also about actions, attitudes, traits portrayed. We see men as strong and even sometimes aggressive, and women are the fragile sex. They are considered fragile sex. They are also the idea of women as mothers. That every woman is born to become a mother. That is a stereotype that occurs in course books as well. And many traits that are considered only for men and traits that are considered only for women. And also non-binary and transgender people, if you think about them, they suffer from invisibility in this context, in course books and other kinds of contexts. But thinking about my experience with different course books, I think I've never seen a non-binary person or a transgender person being represented in course books. So, and I've had my share, my fair share of experience with different course books. So I didn't see anything like it before. And I brought some examples for you that I've made some research on Google Images. The thing that we have to pay attention to is that it's not Google that is doing this. This is like things that we do as a society. So I was looking at Google Images, so I decided to type different professions that in English they are gender neutral. So if I say secretary, this could be a man or a woman. So I decided to type this on Google Images, and I found these pictures. So I found women, basically women being secretaries. I even found some more sexualized images of women portraying secretaries. And, I didn't see any man in the first page of the search results. And that really show us how stereotypes happen. It's there in our faces. I didn't see any male secretaries in there. So I tried to look for other professions as well. So I looked for teacher, which is also a occupation's name that is gender neutral. We could have a male teacher or a female teacher. And I found some male teachers and some female teachers, but the majority are female. And this also shows that we still imagine teachers as women. So this is very marked in our society. Although we have some examples of male teachers, you see that the majority of them are women. And also I looked for computer engineer because I don't know if Thiago told you, but I've also majored in computer science. So in my situation, I was like sometimes the only girl in the room when I was studying. And I would suffer sometimes from prejudice, that what is a woman doing here? Women usually are not good in computer stuff, but I was there. I graduated. And so I tried to look for a computer engineer on Google Images, and that's what I found. We have two pictures of women as computer scientists, as computer engineers, but we have a lot of men in there. And that's the reality of this business. I've studied computer science, and I saw that right at my face. I think that at the end of the course, I had the class was only me and another girl. The rest was boys, only men. So that's the reality that we face in computer science and computer engineering. And also I looked for engineers. This is civil engineer. We have men, we have women in here, and I see that when I looked for engineer, I was expecting to see more women, but the majority of these pictures we see men portrayed as engineers. This is also not a big surprise for anyone, I believe. And also the last occupation that I tried to search for on Google Images was housekeeper. So if you take a look at the pictures, also this is not a big surprise. We have one man in this search results here. The rest of the images, we see women. And we see many women doing the house cleaning and everything. I was also talking to my students. I teach academic writing at Idiomas Sem Fronteiras. So I was talking to them about this presentation today, and they told me that, oh, but I don't see gender bias. So what is that? Could you explain to me a little bit more? So I gave them examples from TV commercials, So I was talking to them about TV commercials about cleaning products, that this is very common to happen in these kind of TV commercials. We have women as the owners of the house. They would clean the house, they would take the kids to school and everything. They would be worried about how clean the house would be, and I'm not gonna cite one of the brands of cleaning products, but it's one that has a man that is very, masculine and, strong. That's the product that is going to help women cleaning the house. And I thought that was very interesting. And, my students said, oh, I never realized that is a man that is going to save a woman in house cleaning. So I said, yeah, that's happening right in our faces, but it's so banal that we don't see that happening. We see that it's like a natural thing, in our society, but we should be discussing that. We should be talking about that, especially with our students. And also continuing with Blumberg's research, we have, the persistence of gender bias in course books. So the idea really with gender bias is that it's hidden in plain sight. So like I said about, occupations, different occupations, some occupations are more related to men and some are more related to women. And we see that this is hidden in plain sight. This is so banal in our society, and that people don't notice that, don't notice that happening. So this is why you should talk about it. And also, the stereotypes of females and males are camouflaged by the taken for granted system of gender stratification and roles. Because if we think about the dichotomy, the gender dichotomy, we think about male and female, we see that we have a hegemonic gender going on. We have the white, cis, straight male that is like the representation of power in terms of gender. And this is something that we shouldn't pursue, right? We should pursue equality, gender equality. But if we see that we have an hegemonic gender. And of course, that these constraints girls and boys' visions of who they are and what they can become, because we are so limited by gender stereotypes that if we have like thinking about occupations again, if you think about girls that want to be scientists, computer scientists as myself, we tend to face many obstacles. Going back to my experience at college, the course began with, I think we had half of the students were male, half the students were female. And at the second semester, I think the majority of girls, they left college, So we face many obstacles at college. We face many obstacles in life. And, this should be totally addressed, because if men want to become something or want to work in a specific profession that is seen as for females only, for example, if you think about the nurse, nurse, if we try to type this on Google Images, of course, we're going to see a lot of women as nurses, but this is a profession for any kind of gender. So, if a man wants to be a nurse, why not? But society tells you that gender stereotypes also, they tell you that, oh, this is not common, so this is not something good, right? But we can break the cycle. We can break the idea of the banality of gender bias. We can break that. And if we do that in schools, that's a great way to start. So thinking about some strategies for fighting gender bias in course books, I was looking at Blumberg's research, and she talks about a comprehensive remedy. So she says that crafting a new anti-gender bias in course books manual that could serve as a template for local adaptation around the world should be a great idea. It would turn the almost uniform system of gender bias in course books on its head via exercises that first expose the bias and then get teachers and students to counteract it. So this is the idea of using the system's flaws against itself. We are going to combat gender bias by using the examples of gender bias found in course books. That's the idea. And also, she talks about teacher training institutes, that maybe this manual, this material should be used, should be included in the curriculum of teacher training courses. And then we would be working, first of all, with the teachers, so they could become aware of gender bias in course books and in other medias as well. And then we would have the teachers that are being trained. They would have experience with also students, and then they would use all the same strategies that they learned at the study phase. They would use them with their own pupils, with their own students. So their students, you would face the same forms of gender sensitivization, and they would become aware of gender bias as well. And the results would be teachers no longer having gender blindness, and this hidden curriculum of, the gender bias that is hidden in plain sight would be undermined. Of course, this is in a long period of time, but this would be a slow process, but that would work. I believe so. And I would leave this question for you. Do you think it's possible for such materials, for such manual to be crafted in Brazil by teachers? Do you think that Braille would be a good place for this work to start? I'm very willing to work with you guys with crafting this material, that would be very, very interesting to work at. And also, I have some strategies for the classroom that I took from Spade 2015. I would establish the guidelines for the classroom, highlighting the importance of a respectful environment. So this is something that all teachers could do with their students since the first day of class. And also Spade says that we should encourage critical engagement related to gender, race, ethnicity, class, disability, sexual orientation, country of origin, because I don't know about your experiences in teaching, but I came across several students that were from other countries. Right now I have a student from Iran, and also I have a student from Peru. That's very common to have at UFRJ, at Idiomas Sem Fronteiras and CLAC. This is very common. So this is also something that we should address. And thinking about it, this is the perfect time and space for breaking gender bias. This is the moment that you should use to break the cycle of gender bias. And also Spade says that using language that reflects respect for students' self-identity, using their chosen name, for example, and pronoun, not assuming the gender identity of students, that communicates that you are invested in creating and maintaining a classroom welcoming to all students, So I have an anecdote. I have a small story to share with you. When I was working at an English course that I'm not going to say the name, I had a student, a transgender student, that she was transitioning during that period of my classes, and she had some problems at home. She would portray herself as male in front of her family, but then at the English school, she would feel comfortable in performing her gender, and so she would let her hair, like she wouldn't comb her hair in a certain way. She would use, she would wear paint clothes to show that her nails as well were always done. And she was starting to adopt her social name. But at the beginning it was difficult for the students to accept that, because I don't think that they ever faced this kind of situation before. So I helped her in this transition process. So they would start using her social name. So they would start using the right pronouns for that. And that was a great experience. I thought that I developed myself as a human being even better because of this situation. I think that if you have the opportunity to have a non-binary person or a transgender person in your classroom, you should know how to treat them with respect. That's what I try to do, And also I leave another question for you to, try to answer. Do you as a teacher follow similar steps in your classroom? Do you try to establish the guidelines for the classroom, think about the respect that we should have for one another? Do you try to encourage critical engagement related to many different subjects? Do you try to use language in a way that reflects respect for students' self-identity? What do you do? I want to see your ideas. Yeah? So let me show you a little bit of the references that I have. I can, if you have any questions about it, I can send you the slides so you can see the references. These are texts that I use at college that I've been studying so far at college. And They are very important texts for understanding sexism, gender bias, how gender stereotypes are constructed in language. So, you know, those references will be with me forever. You know, they are great books, great blogs. So I think you should all visit, for example, Deborah Cameron's blog. It's great. You can have many ideas about how language influences on stereotypes and the perpetuation of gender stereotypes as well. So I believe that's it. This is now about the discussion time. Thank you very much for listening to me. I was very pleased to be a part of this event. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Fernanda, for joining us and giving such an enlightening talk. Now we are just going to stop sharing screen so you can see Fernanda, but you cannot see myself. Guess where
Hello.
I am? I'm hidden. So Fernanda and I, we're just going to have a look at the at our Facebook, at our YouTube channel to see your questions. So we have Leticia.
Oh, they're answering the questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So Fernanda, would you like to read the questions for us?
So let's see. How do I do that? They're going
here.
Okay. So Leticia Salles, that I know, right?
We all know.
Hello, Leticia. So she says that when teaching professions, I present students with pictures of groups of professionals of different genders to avoid gender bias. So this is what I try to do. And so in the end, it's all day. Okay, yeah, about language. So it also caters to gender neutral language. This is what I try to do, you know, especially when we are talking about English for academic purposes. You know, if you think about the scientific articles, I was talking to my students about it. We see that it can be very gender biased, you know. So that's what I try to talk to them, that they should use more inclusive language in their articles, in what they produce, because they have to produce a lot of things in English as well. So this is very important. And Leticia Garcia, which is a very close friend of mine at college, so she says that on the first day of class, I asked them, how do you want to be called? And I do a dynamics with this. I don't know if this works, but people like this. I really like that idea as well. I think I've never done this like an activity in the classroom. So I think that would work really well. Also, let me see the others. Oh, that's the arrow. I'm so blind. Oh, okay. And Thomas says that I bring people doing something that is not expected to their gender, like a secretary man, a woman firefighter, a boy dancing ballet, and a girl skateboarding, to work with singular forms, for example. This is fantastic. That's what I try to do. Can I cite one course book in particular? I think
Sure.
it's okay. At CLAC, which is Curso de Línguas Aberto à Comunidade. This is a project from UFRJ. We use a book called Voices. This is from our coordinator, Rogério Tílio. And he had this preoccupation of having different genders performing different activities, not to be conforming to gender bias. So he tried to break that cycle as well in his books, which is, you know, this is a good example of course books changing the way we see, you know, activities related to many different genders, you know. So there, we have a question from Tomasz. Have you ever had a negative response from students because you have presented something that doesn't fit gender stereotypes? That's a great question. I always get negative feedback sometimes. There's always a student that say, but I don't see that happening in our daily lives. That's not common. That's not something that that happens. But that's exactly the point that I try to make. I try to show many different people doing many different things and trying to break this idea that men should portray themselves in a certain way, women should portray themselves in a certain way as well. I try to break that by bringing pictures that are not what students normally see in society. So I try to do that, but sometimes I get negative responses. I think that's very that's common. I hope that this is not going to be common in the near future, because of the work that we do. But let's see. Sergio, hello, Sergio. What do you do when a boy or a girl comes up with a comment on a classmate's outfit or behavior and says, it's so girly, referring to a boy, or it's so boyish, referring to a girl? I always question, I always say, why are you saying that? I try to make students realize that what you're saying is not, is related to gender bias, that, this is not good. I try to ask them and see their responses and try to work with their responses. I try to do that all the time. Right now, I'm just working with adults, but sometimes adults have that reaction, sometimes, I get these comments and I try to ask them, why do you think that, try to see what they say. And from then I try to work with the idea that, we should be able to do and say whatever we want to say without, of course, that we have to respect other people in the classroom, but we can perform ourselves in a different way, in the way that we feel like we are truly performing and portraying ourselves, And yeah, Voices. Voices is a great book. I love it. The 5 why rule. Yeah, that's what I try to do. I'm always asking why to my students, always. And yeah, student hates our why, totally. but I asked them, I had a problem with 2 students specifically. I'm not, of course, oh my God, I have to talk about it. We were talking about language prejudice, so they had prejudice towards people that would say, pra mim fazer, they would, express themselves like that. And I would say, but, that doesn't exist in our language to say pra mim fazer. And then I said, well, if people are saying that, it's because it exists in our language, although you think this is not correct, but that exists. You cannot say that doesn't exist. So we had some, we were discussing that, and then they would never come back to class. That happened. But, I think that I give some food for thought for them, I hope that, that made them, think in a different way. I don't know, maybe not, but we try. And yeah, whenever I'm faced with such commentary, I simply ask why at least 5 times in a row they soon get the message. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Sergio. I was really nervous, but I got it. Thank you very much for enjoying and the presentation. I tried to do this with much care and thinking about everyone that would be pay attention to this presentation. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to talk about all of those things that I study at college. Thank you very much. And any advice for dealing with parents? As I said before, right now I'm just dealing with adults, that can be as complicated as dealing with, parents and kids, that can be very complicated. But when I was teaching kids, I don't know, I think I never had a situation that I had to talk with parents about any of those things. They never complained about me trying to talk to students about gender bias or anything. Maybe I need some more experience with dealing with kids and teaching kids. Maybe that will come up. I don't know. But I never had problems with this kind of situation. Yeah, good for you. They didn't come back. Yeah, good for me. Exactly. That was really good. But anyway, but I wanted them to come back because I wanted to. I wanted to keep the conversation going. It was sad. I thought maybe I did something really wrong. I said something that hurt their feelings. I don't know, because when you are, I had a lot of students agree with me, and those two were like, oh, but I don't believe it. I don't know what she's saying. Oh my God. And then I said, well, that, something bad is going to happen. They are not going to come back. But, I wanted them to come back to continue the conversation, but that happens. Juliana, the examples you gave with Google were interesting. You can see that women with an academic degree is rarer than a man in the same position in searches. Oh, yeah. Teacher versus professor. Yeah, that happens. We have an asymmetric relation between these two positions. Yeah, totally. And it's very sad, right? Because Google is just giving you the results of how society sees people, how society sees women, in those professional aspects. So it's like, for me, this is really sad. But I think we can, you see that we have some pictures that could show something different, and these are the pictures that we should use in our classes. I don't know about you guys, but I'm very visual in my classes. I always have tons of slides and images and videos, so I try to show like the other side of the situation, that we women can be whatever we want, in terms of our professional life. You can do whatever you want, but of course we're going to face a lot of obstacles, but we are strong, we can do that. So I think it's, do we have any other questions? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
So it's done. So thank you very much for having me in your houses. Thank you very much.
And Fernanda, thank you for that. That was really wonderful. Thank you all for the questions. I know you can't see me, but you can see Fernanda, and her face is much more beautiful than mine. So I'd rather be with her, trust me. Just some quick messages. If you want to have a certificate at the end of this presentation, this is what you should do. You should go to bit.ly, that's L-Y, /Brelt Queer Day 2017. So you go to bit.ly /Brelt Queer Day 2017 certificate, sorry. Brelt Queer Day 2017 certificate. And we will be back in the afternoon. And so right now we're going to break for lunch, and we'll be back at 2 p.m. from 2 to 2:45, sorry. We're going to have our live Braille chat, and then we're going to have concurrent sessions happening from 3:40 to 4:40. And then we're going to have the amazing Cynthia Rodriguez. She's going to give our closing plenary at 4:50, from 4:50 to 5:50.
Just, Luis, I'm going to answer this question in WhatsApp. Okay, thank you very much.
So there was a final question. I'm really curious to know what that was.
Yeah, but I'm going to, it's not, we don't have time, I'm sorry.
We don't.
Yeah.
But she's going to pose that question to Brelt and answer that, because I'm really curious to know what that question was.
Okay.
So thank you very much for coming. We'll see you later. As soon as we find where we are, so we can...
Where are we?
End transmission.
There.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.